Good afternoon and good day to you. My name is Brandon Tiltz, and you're joining me this afternoon, for another episode of Feather of Light, podcast where we explore mental health, philosophy, sometimes parts work, or other times I just bring in my personal insights. And this recent episode, just this last episode, I did a self-exploration of my creative parts using the lens of parts work and exploring conversations and dialogues with my parts. Now, this episode is going to be another kind of experiment, I suppose. I'm going to try something a little different. So instead of jumping into an educational topic and giving personal reflections and weaving in some source material that I've read, I'm just going to talk more casually about life and mental health and friendships and relationships and conflict and, some of these things that I've just been personally experiencing in different ways throughout my life. And not making it so much about like you're listening to a lecture or this is a counseling space necessarily, whereas I do want to bring in my lens as a counselor. I just want this to be more intimate. Maybe like you're hanging out with your buddy, just having a tea, just chilling, going for a walk in the forest like I often do with my friends. And just trying to make this more of me. And so maybe you can get to know me a little bit more. So I'm not going to talk too much about parts work. If it comes up and I feel called to speak to something parts related, I might, but let's just dive on in. This is an improv style podcast. We're going to make it a little bit shorter too. So what's been coming up in my life lately? I feel I've been gravitating towards revisiting old friendships. I've been leaning back into community in ways I haven't done since before I left for my travels in South America and Mexico. So it's been maybe a year and a half, maybe closer to 2 years since I've really kind of put myself out there, been to a kirtan, been to a song circle, all these things I used to do. And then once I went to South America, I felt a little bit sort of turned off of that whole scene. And I think I was closing myself off, and I still do sometimes, but just noticing how I've come to realize I have beliefs around what my healing process looks like, what is the spiritual process that I need to sort of like engage with. And I'm recognizing that the way I interact with others, I really have set pretty strong, and I'd say even potentially rigid boundaries around how I engage with other people. And I mean, I think this makes sense. I used to have quite open, porous is the word, but kind of open boundaries. Went to a lot of parties and raves and went to every event that piqued my interest and spent a lot of time talking with people very openly, maybe, to the point of emotional drain at times. And then over time, I was like, you know what? This isn't working for me. This isn't helping me show up for people better. This isn't even really giving me lasting friendships. It's just like there's this drain that was coming from me just giving and not saying no when I honestly should have said no, or other times not leaving a space at the appropriate time because I was kind of just so excited to be engaging with other humans and talking and connecting, and it was just kind of like I didn't want it to end. Right? You ever have those experiences where you just stay up super late at night and you're like, I'm not going to bed. I don't want to go to bed because then I have to get ready for work in the morning, or the fun ends, right? There's this kind of scarcity mindset of I'm not going to have fun again tomorrow. Who knows when the next opportunity will come. So I'm going to stay up all night painting or playing video games or going out to a party or, maybe just hanging out and scrolling social media. And it's kind of like, I think I was that way more so a couple years ago. And then also when I would be out at social events, it was kind of like, I wouldn't go to like after hours clubs or anything, but I would stick around an event as long as possible, and no one would really encourage other people to be aware of the time. It's kind of not like, oh my gosh, it's past your bedtime. It's like, no, we're all adults, and we're talking, and it's enjoyable, and the flow of time is irrelevant. So I'd stay out quite late, and then my sleep routine would struggle. And once in a while, that's not too bad, but if that's consistent, that would really be problematic. And I noticed how when I was starting to take on clients, oftentimes I'd meet with them in the mornings, and my professional life, my entrepreneurial life was being impacted. So I just kind of had to set that boundary. And now I'm recognizing where, oh, okay, maybe once in a while, I can actually put myself out there and set those boundaries in those situations and not feel like I'm just quote unquote abandoning myself for sake of enjoying a social experience, because there's like a scarcity of, will I get this connection in the next week? Will I feel, like I actually have the time or can dedicate the time to do this type of thing for another couple weeks? I don't know. So recognizing that was a pattern that I had and probably kept me from leaning into certain friendships or going out to parties or events or song circles or kirtans that I really probably would have enjoyed and probably would have felt very deeply connected to spiritually, probably would have helped my heart open up more. And then I've also noticed that I've associated friendships with certain, let's just call it like things that had happened to me that are unpleasant or karmic, or just like what I'd say are kind of like mistakes I've made and decisions I've made, which were hard for me to own. And then I associate that with other people. It's kind of like the way I've shifted into victim mentality over the years. When I go somewhere and I don't feel like it meets an expectation, or, an interaction doesn't go as planned, or something happens and I feel shame around it, and then I just dwell in that victim mentality, and then I kind of just like scrub my social radar clean. And I mean, here's the thing, there's a nuance to that. Obviously, setting boundaries and not just like allowing people that are actually unhealthy for you to just like stick around and continuously cross boundaries and maybe like pull you into decisions that you don't necessarily feel are aligned with your values. Like that's the thing I feel I do very well and continue to do very well. But then it's like not continuing to associate people that I've met over the years, or kind of like maybe just more of acquaintances. And then I've just sort of like roped them in with, oh, they're part of that whole experience that was negative for me. And since I'm not the one who can take responsibility, or I don't want to take personal accountability for putting myself in that situation, it's very simple for me to see there's this like group out there that I just avoid. There's this community that's just bad for me inherently. It's an all or nothing statement, right? It's not like, oh, that particular event, or oh, that that boundary that they may be attempting to cross and I enforce. No, it's just like, it's easier for me to just pull out entirely and find a new community and reinvent myself, and maybe just not go out to social things for a long time. And recognizing that there's been benefits to doing that for sure. There's been so much that I've attuned to and learned and acquired and cultivated, like whether it be my business, whether it be working with parts work in a more developed way, whether it be traveling and experiencing different medicine communities. Like I've benefited from that act of pulling out of community, but then at the same time recognizing, I want to forgive people. I don't say need, because it's kind of like a should, or, ought to, should kind of thing. Like there's an obligation to it, but I really genuinely desire connection. And in order to have connection, I'm noticing that I'm required to forgive people that I do not want to. At least my protector parts. There we go. My protector parts do not want to forgive people. It's kind of like the protector parts are so quick to judge and so quick to dismiss because they're noticing the protector parts of other people. And they're kind of like, oh, there's another protector. That protector isn't going to respect this person, and in many ways they're exiles usually, right? Because protectors, let's just like super quick jumping in it, they're just doing everything they can to protect the exiles. That's their job. That's always been their job, and it always on some level will be their job. But you also have to respect that when you step into a space where someone else's protector parts are online, which oftentimes they are, right? They might not know how to respect the nuances of what your protector parts expect from you or what your exiles need to feel safe, right? So there's going to be many times where you feel triggered and you're kind of like, oh, it's that fucking person. And it's like, yeah, it's something they've done, or their protector parts have activated let's just say an expression that they needed to express. And then your protector parts, being the ones who are still kind of out of the loop, they're like, danger, danger. What can we do here, internal system? Well, if they look to you as self and you don't have the capacity to introduce compassion and clarity and connectedness and curiosity about their protector parts and even your protector parts, dialoguing with them, well, the immediate response is going to be from the lens of your protectors that maybe developed that person's no good, we need to get the fuck out of here response when you were a kid. Let's just say, for instance, that was your parent, right? Maybe there was an emotional disassociation, or there was a way to which it made more sense to place the blame on other. See, I'm saying this victim mentality doesn't come from an irrational, illogical place. It makes perfect sense that we go into victim mentality when we're children, because there's often not a choice. When you're the child and the parent is the one who's not creating safety, there's not really an ability to choose a solution mindset. There's not really an ability to shift out of the victim mentality. And these protector parts uphold those same beliefs, right? So these protector parts are going to default to victim mentality because it's what you knew, how you knew that you could get emotional safety in spaces where there was no choice whether you could be emotionally safe or not. And the only way to get that emotional safety was to, let's just say, embrace a type of victim mentality, because it pushes the blame or the onus goes on to other, often the parent, right? Or often, the circumstances or something. And as a child, when you don't have the choice, that makes perfect sense. In fact, these protector parts are doing what they had to do and what has worked for so long that when you're older, you almost just have to update them and let them know, hey, in the adult world, with my capacity as an adult, the victim mentality doesn't actually make sense anymore. The victim mentality is actually what is pulling me away from the ability to learn, the ability to connect, the ability to lean into community. So yeah, the ability to resolve the conflict. And yeah, I think I notice how the victim mentality still plays out for me when I'm getting into conflicts. So a good example of this, when I was finishing up a counseling session with my counselor, a lot of my protector parts came up. We talked about disorganized attachment. We talked about a lot of my childhood wounding, right? Some intense conversations got up. I got straight up bitter, right? My protector parts were just like fucking throwing jabs. They're like, oh, that motherfucker. to give you the context, and this might be helpful for some, so I'll give you some details. I'm starting to look at how when we were younger, often children, we start to form these unconscious agreements with our parents, because our parents essentially impose whatever agreements they had in their relationship or whatever agreements they had with their parents, and they start to set this agreement. Let's just assume they could have written a list of agreements with you as a kid and been like, hey, little kiddo, so we're going to agree, right? You and me, we're going to agree to, I don't show up for you emotionally, but I give you all the financial stability you need. How's that sound? Cool. Sounds like you agree. Good. And just so you know, I'm not going to model a healthy emotional relationship. It's just, we don't need that. So I'm not going to do that. And do you agree to that? Well, no choice. We're going to do it. And it's kind of like some of these agreements can be just like very deeply irrational, and they don't actually create safety for you. but these are the agreements that your parents unconsciously enter into with you. This is what they've sort of enforced, right? You have to consider it as a parental role. They have authority over you. They have power over you. They're enforcing these agreements onto you. You don't have a choice. So me in this therapy session, getting back to that, I recognized and started to name all these agreements and how much they really just did not align with what I need as a child. They do not align with what I need now. However, from the lens of my attachment style, I still draw from these agreements. I still draw from the agreement that, what's a good example? We don't resolve conflict in this house. No, it doesn't make sense to resolve conflict because it leads to further emotional hurt. That's kind of like the agreement, whether that's functional or not. That's the agreement. So I realized, oh, I don't agree with that. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Why the hell is that the agreement to begin with? And a lot of these agreements, were coming up, and I was just getting agitated and noticing my protector parts coming online. And so I tangented twice. So just returning back to why, I was just telling you why I was feeling triggered after this counseling call. Started talking about these unconscious agreements, getting super angry and feeling into that anger and doing so in a healthy way, in a contained way with my therapist, right? And then after that session, I got into a conflict. Oh no. I go upstairs and I'm trying to get some my soup made, and I accidentally interrupted somebody. And I was kind of coming in after the fact being like, oh, I'm sorry I interrupted you. But then the person was just like bitter because I didn't step in and ask and sort of like say, excuse me, hey, can I interrupt you for a moment here? I didn't preemptively consider their feelings. I was really deeply triggered and I just wanted to eat. I was starving. So, I didn't show up in a way I'd personally say was in line with my values, but at the same time, the conflict arose and my protector parts were, they were online. And, just getting back to conflict and forgiveness and resolving of conflict and rewriting these dysfunctional patterns. It was like, at first, I just had to honor that my protector part was in a space where it just needed to voice and be witnessed and express itself. And I did so. And I had to give myself some space. I had to eat. I had to honor my needs. And I reached a certain point where I could recognize that how I was showing up was actually this impulse to just go back to those old agreements, right? Just, turns out, even though I know, like in my mind, I understand that this other person has the right to not be interrupted, or when I'm being confronted in that way, I want to ideally resolve that conflict and speak from a place of compassion and understanding. Let's just say I'm self-led. I want to be self-led, but the protector part is just so ingrained into its belief system about attachment and how it chooses to not resolve conflict because it wants to avoid the emotional hurt, even just for that moment when I'm feeling dysregulated. And so at first I just operated unconsciously through that old pattern, through that old, what I call agreement, right? But luckily it was lovely that I had the space to, eat my soup, sit down and do some breathing, really fully integrate what had happened and check in with my parts. I think I more so just did like somatic check-ins. I didn't do like a conscious like, hey, protectors, how you doing? It was more of I think I just felt into my bodily experience, did some breath work, might have done some singing, I can't remember. But then it's like, then I recognized that, hey, I can rewrite these agreements. In this moment, I can show up just a little bit differently. And it is just as simple as modeling to others, modeling to your parts, just a little bit more compassion. And here's something I want to be clear about. When you model compassion and when you step up and are integral with your desire for, let's just say, forgiveness or to forgive other, right? Unfortunately, we can't expect that that's always going to be received, and that's always going to create closure for us. Stepping up for our parts is just that. It's for our parts. As much as we want this to lead to directly resolving conflicts or maybe being received by others with like who can mirror back that compassion, I would say in many cases, people's protector parts don't allow them to mirror back that compassion. They don't allow them to genuinely forgive and accept. And the best we can do is find that within ourselves, rewrite those agreements, recognize when we're going to those protector parts and how they still uphold those outdated agreements and beliefs. And then once we are able to, work with those protector parts and have that trust built, we can show up within new relationships differently, or maybe over time we can show up in those old relationships differently, and maybe that person can meet us where we're at. But realistically, it's like I don't expect people to meet me where I'm at, because what I do, how I show up, is for sake of my internal system. It's for sake of my internal children and for my future children. It's for sake of them, not to be selfish about it. I'm not saying that it's not also, right? Like indirectly, it's also for sake of community. It's also for sake of friendships. It's also for sake of our personal, intimate relationships. But that being said, first and foremost, the way I show up is for me. And it's not always like I can expect others to, in a sense, give me the feedback or the positive reinforcement that I want to continue going deeper into, say, working with my parts, or to continue to, say, trying to question and get curious about how my protector parts are showing up, So I went to a lot today. Maybe some of this has landed. Maybe some of this has gone over your head. But if you don't understand how parts work operates, I totally get it. It took me years to even really get the gist and feel comfortable just exploring it on my own. So if there's anyone who's interested, I do have weekly parts workshops. They're educational. They're about witnessing. They're about experiencing just a small piece of introducing awareness to your parts. They're not deep dives. I want to make that perfectly clear. We're not doing IFS or parts work deep dives, but it's just introducing people to parts work. It's creating a safe space for that. And in addition to that, if you want to work with me one-on-one and create a counseling container where we can introduce lots of safety and lots of acceptance, and then move forward with parts work once we've created that trust, that's something that I offer to the public. And I have some availability, not a lot, but at least maybe room for about one client, possibly two, depending on how things unfold with my other workshops. And yeah, I also just really want to recommend that people check out my last podcast my last podcast episode, where I checked in with my creative parts in real time, and I really displayed how I work with my parts and tried to kind of give something of a demonstration of how one might be able to work with their parts, using the language that I use, just having the approach of looking to the body and really listening to how the body responds. And just recognizing, first and foremost, when you do this work, there's no bad parts. There's no bad parts in you. There's no bad parts in anybody else. There's a degree to which it's really hard to recognize that when we see all these parts that are out there doing destructive things, but just recognizing that the way we see other people's parts is a direct connection, in relationship with how we see our own parts. There's a kind of projection there. If you're demonizing other people's parts, you're probably demonizing your own parts, and just offering a space of, well, how can you start to see your parts differently? How can you start to see other people's parts differently? And how can you introduce more compassion and acceptance and connectedness, because we're all connected, right? So thanks for joining me today. Try to keep this a little brief, so 24 minutes, not too bad. Lastly, just reminding everybody that the parts workshop is coming up tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Or additionally, it's going to be Saturday morning at 10 a.m. It says in 2 days. And then the following Saturday at 10 a.m. I'm going to continue those at 10 a.m. And love to have people drop in, fill an intake, a few questions, takes a couple minutes. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you Find some compassion for your parts. Start to listen more deeply to the body and attune to this beautiful energy that we call self, but in many ways it's just spirit. So attune to spirit, recognize it's there, welcoming that spiritual energy into your body, into your mind, into your heart. All right, have a great afternoon. Take care.